Part 3. The Korean Mafia boss followed his maid, and what he found out made him fall in love with her. If you love stories of forbidden romance and dangerous secrets, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. Now, let's begin. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into the final chapter of this incredible saga, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a like if you've been following this story from the beginning. And let me know in the comments, what state or country are you watching from today? I love seeing how far this community reaches. Now, let's continue where we left off. Suman sat beside him as the dawn light crept through the windows, holding his hand even though it was growing cold. She remembered the first time she had seen him, terrifying in his power, and the first time he had smiled at her, revealing the lonely boy beneath the monster's mask. She remembered their first kiss, desperate and unexpected, in the ruins of his destroyed study. She remembered their wedding, small and intimate, with Han scattering flower petals like she was performing surgery. She remembered the years of building, of transforming, of becoming something neither of them had ever imagined possible. 60 years. They had been together for 60 years, from that rainy Tuesday morning when she had arrived at his penthouse with trembling hands and tired eyes, to this quiet dawn when he had slipped away from her forever. It wasn't enough. It would never have been enough, but it was more than either of them had ever expected, and for that, she was grateful. The funeral was the largest Seoul had ever seen. Thousands of people lined the streets as the procession made its way through the city, not just syndicate members, though there were plenty of those, dressed in black and wearing expressions of genuine grief, but also ordinary citizens, shop owners and teachers and nurses and construction workers, people whose lives had been touched by the Kang Foundation's work over the decades. The hospital he had built sent a delegation of doctors and nurses, many of whom had trained there thanks to scholarships his foundation provided. The schools he had funded sent students who held signs thanking him for their education. The community centers and homeless shelters and rehabilitation facilities, all the places where his money had made a difference, they all sent representatives to pay their respects. He was a complicated man, the minister said during the service, choosing his words carefully. A man who lived in shadows but reached toward the light. A man who committed terrible acts in his youth, but spent his later years trying to atone for them. He did not pretend to be a saint. He knew what he was, what he had been, and he carried the weight of his choices every day of his life. The minister paused, looking out at the vast crowd, but he also believed in redemption. He believed that people could change, that the past did not have to define the future, that love was stronger than fear, and he proved it, not through words, but through decades of action, through hospitals and schools and foundations, through a marriage that lasted 60 years, through children and grandchildren who carry his legacy forward. Han spoke next. She was in her 50s now, a renowned surgeon, a mother and grandmother herself. Her hair was streaked with gray, but her eyes still held the same determination that had driven her to volunteer at that hospital so many years ago. My uncle was not a perfect man, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. He never claimed to be. He made terrible choices in his youth, choices that hurt people, destroyed lives, caused suffering that could never be fully undone. He knew this. He lived with it every day. She took a breath. But he also taught me something important. He taught me that we are not defined by our worst moments, that every day is a chance to choose differently, to be better, to build something meaningful from the ruins of our mistakes. He didn't just talk about redemption. He lived it every single day for 60 years. She looked at the coffin, at the man who had been her uncle, her protector, her example of what transformation looked like. Rest now, uncle. You've earned it. Suman spoke last. She was 85 years old, frail but unbowed, standing at the podium with the same quiet dignity she had carried her entire life. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the thousands of people who had come to say goodbye to her husband, and she felt something that surprised her. Pride. Jaewon once told me that he didn't believe in redemption, she began, her voice soft but clear. When we first met, he was convinced that some stains could never be washed clean, that some sins were too great to be forgiven, that men like him were destined for darkness no matter what they did. She paused. I spent 60 years proving him wrong. A ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. He was a monster when I met him. I won't pretend otherwise. He had killed people, hurt people, built an empire on fear and violence. If you had told me then that I would spend my life with him, I would have thought you were insane. She smiled softly, but I saw something in him that he couldn't see in himself, a capacity for love that he had buried so deep he thought it was gone forever, a hunger for connection that he masked with coldness and cruelty, a soul that was wounded, not destroyed. She touched the coffin gently. I didn't save him. No one can save another person. They have to save themselves. But I showed him that it was possible. I gave him something to fight for, something beyond power and control. And he made the choice, every single day, to be worthy of that gift. Her voice cracked slightly. He wasn't perfect. We fought constantly about money and children and what to watch on television. He was stubborn and difficult and sometimes impossible to live with. But he loved me, truly, completely, without reservation, and I loved him the same way. She straightened. The world will remember Kang Jae-won as many things. A crime boss who went legitimate, a philanthropist who built hospitals and schools, a man who transformed an empire of darkness into something approaching light. But I will remember him simply as my husband, the man who came for me when I was taken, who held my hand through every storm, who made me laugh and cry and scream with frustration. The man who proved that love is stronger than anything, even the past. She turned to face the coffin one last time. Wait for me, my love. I'll be there soon. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Suman did not die in the weeks following Jae-won's funeral, though many expected her to. The grief was immense, a weight that pressed down on her with crushing force. But she had survived worse. She had survived poverty and homelessness and the terror of being kidnapped by a madman. She had survived decades of living in the shadow of danger, of loving a man whose past was written in blood. She would survive this too, not because she wanted to, but because there was still work to be done. The Kang Foundation required leadership. The charitable work needed to continue. The hospitals and schools and community centers didn't run themselves, and there were grandchildren who needed guidance, who needed to understand the complicated legacy they had inherited. So Suman rose each morning, dressed, and faced the day. She attended board meetings and fundraising galas. She visited the hospital where Han still performed surgeries, where a new generation of doctors trained thanks to scholarships in Jae-won's name. She spent time with Min and Yuna, Han's children, watching them navigate their own lives with the same determination their grandmother had always shown. And at night, alone in the penthouse that still smelled faintly of Jae-won's cologne, she would sit by the window and talk to him, tell him about her day, about the children, about the small victories and setbacks of running the foundation. She knew he couldn't hear her probably, but it comforted her nonetheless. Min asked about you today, she told him one evening, 3 months after the funeral. He's in college now, studying business, says he wants to run the foundation someday. I told him you would be proud. She was quiet for a moment. Yuna is different. She's more like you were, I think, angry at the world, looking for something to fight against. Han worries about her. I told her not to. You were angry too, and look how you turned out. She laughed softly. Eventually, anyway. The night was clear, the city lights spreading out beneath her like a sea of stars. So much had changed since she had first arrived at this penthouse, clutching her documents and trying not to tremble. She had been 25 years old, exhausted and afraid, carrying secrets she thought no one would ever understand. And now she was 85, a widow, the matriarch of a family and foundation that touched thousands of lives. What a strange journey it had been. The crisis came 6 months after Jae-won's death. It began, as such things often do, with money. The Kang Foundation had grown enormous over the decades, funded by the legitimate businesses that Jae-won had built and expanded. But the transition from organized crime to legitimate enterprise had never been complete. Not really. There were still shadows in the Foundation's history, old money that had been laundered through various channels, connections to people and organizations that had never been fully severed. A journalist discovered it. Her name was Yoon Soo-jin, and she was exactly the kind of reporter who gave powerful people nightmares. Young, hungry, brilliant, and utterly without fear. She had built her career on exposing corruption, on digging up secrets that people thought were safely buried, on holding the powerful accountable for their actions. And now she had turned her attention to the Kang Foundation. Mrs. Kang, Secretary Yoon's replacement, a competent woman named Director Kim, approached Suman with a tablet displaying the journalist's initial inquiries. We have a situation. Suman read the questions carefully. They were precise, targeted, showing a deep understanding of the Foundation's history and structure. Someone had been feeding this reporter information, someone who knew things that only an insider could know. What does she have? Suman asked. We're not sure exactly, but her question suggests she's found evidence of the original money laundering operations from 30 years ago, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the connections to the syndicate's less savory activities. That was before the full transition, before Jae-won cleaned everything up. Yes, ma'am. But the foundation was built on that money. Every hospital, every school, every community center. The clean money funded them, yes. but it was all seeded by the dirty money. The origins can be traced if someone knows where to look. Suman sat back in her chair. This was the shadow they had always lived under, the past that could never be fully escaped. Jaewon had known it would catch up with them eventually. He had prepared for it as best he could, documentation and legal strategies and crisis communication plans, but he had always assumed he would be there to face it. Now the crisis had come, and she was alone. What does legal say? They're concerned. If this reporter publishes what she has, there could be investigations, charges, civil suits. The foundation's assets could be frozen. The charitable work could be shut down. The hospitals, the schools, everything, ma'am. Everything we've built over 60 years could be destroyed. Suman closed her eyes. She thought about Jaewon, about all the years he had spent trying to build something good from something terrible, about the children in the pediatric ward, the students with scholarships, the families in the community housing, all of it threatened by the sins of the past. What would he do? The answer came to her immediately, clear as a bell. Set up a meeting with the journalist. I want to speak with her personally. Director Kim hesitated. Ma'am, that's extremely inadvisable. Anything you say could set up the meeting, Suman repeated firmly. If our past is going to catch up with us, then I will face it directly. That's what Jaewon would have done. That's what I will do. Yoon Soo-jin was younger than Suman had expected, 30 at most, with sharp eyes and a sharp suit and an expression that suggested she had never backed down from anything in her life. She reminded Suman of herself, all those years ago, when she had argued semantics with a crime boss in his own kitchen. The meeting took place in the foundation's conference room. Director Kim had wanted to have lawyers present, but Suman had refused. This was not going to be a legal strategy session. This was going to be a conversation. Mrs. Kang, Soo-jin began, settling into her chair with a recorder on the table between them. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I have to say I'm surprised. Most people in your position would hide behind lawyers and PR representatives. Most people in my position didn't spend their formative years as a housekeeper. Suman replied calmly. I've never been very good at hiding. A flicker of surprise crossed Soo-jin's face, whatever she had expected from the elderly widow of a reformed crime boss. This wasn't it. You know why I'm here. You found evidence that the Kang Foundation was built on money laundered through various criminal enterprises, that the hospitals and schools and community centers my husband funded were paid for, at least initially, by proceeds from drug trafficking, extortion, and possibly worse. Soo-jin's eyebrows rose. You're not going to deny it? What would be the point? You have the evidence. We both know what it shows. Suman folded her hands on the table. The question is, what you're going to do with it. I'm going to publish it. That's what journalists do. And what happens then? The truth comes out. The public learns who the Kang family really was, what they really did, where their money really came from. And the hospitals? The schools? The children who depend on those services? Soo-jin's expression hardened. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to the truth. Is it, or is it to justice? Suman leaned forward. Tell me, Miss Yoon, what do you think justice looks like in this case? Hey everyone, quick reminder. If you're loving this final chapter, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Your support means everything. Now let's get back to this incredible conclusion. The question seemed to catch Soo-jin off guard. She was used to defensive subjects, to evasions and denials and threats. She was not used to being challenged philosophically by an 85-year-old widow. Justice means accountability. It means people facing consequences for their actions. My husband faced consequences every day of his life. The guilt he carried, the nightmares that woke him in the night, the knowledge of what he had done and who he had hurt. Do you think clean money and charitable work erased that? Do you think he ever forgot? That's not the same as legal accountability. No, it's not. But the people who could have been legally held accountable are dead. My husband is dead. His father is dead. The lieutenants who actually ran the operations, most of them are dead too. Who exactly do you want to punish? Soo-jin's jaw tightened. The foundation. The foundation is run by accountants and lawyers and charitable workers who have never committed a crime in their lives. The hospitals are staffed by doctors and nurses who care for sick children. The schools are filled with students who want to learn, taught by teachers who want to teach. If you destroy the foundation, those are the people who suffer, not the dead men who did terrible things 40 years ago. The money is still tainted. Yes, it is. Suman's voice was quiet, but firm. It always will be. Nothing can change what my husband did in his youth. Nothing can bring back the people he hurt. The money that built this foundation came from darkness, and we can't pretend otherwise. She paused. But Miss Yoon, every fortune in the world has blood on it somewhere. The great families of Europe built their wealth on colonialism and slavery. The tech billionaires exploited workers and evaded taxes. The politicians you interview, Their campaigns are funded by corporations that destroy the environment and exploit the poor. Does that mean we tear down everything they've built? Does that mean we reject every good thing that comes from tainted sources? This is different. This is organized crime. Is it different, or is it just more visible? Suman shook her head. I'm not asking you to forgive my husband. I'm not asking you to pretend the past didn't happen. I'm asking you to think about what your story will actually accomplish. She gestured at the room around them. This foundation employs 3,000 people directly and supports tens of thousands more. It funds 12 hospitals, 47 schools, and over 100 community programs. Last year alone, we provided medical care to 90,000 children and educational scholarships to 15,000 students. If you publish your story, all of that stops. Investigations, lawsuits, frozen assets. It could take years to sort out. And in the meantime, people suffer. That's emotional manipulation. It's reality. I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to show you the full picture. Suman met the journalist's eyes directly. You have the power to destroy something that took 60 years to build. You have the power to hurt thousands of people who have done nothing wrong. The question is that what you want? Sujin was silent for a long moment. What would you suggest instead? Tell the truth, all of it. The darkness and the light, the crimes and the transformation. Show people what the Kang Foundation was built on. Yes, but also show them what it has become. Let them decide for themselves whether the good outweighs the bad, and if they decide it doesn't, then at least they'll have made an informed choice. And so will I. Suman straightened. If the public reads your story and decides the foundation should be destroyed, I won't fight it. I'll cooperate with every investigation, answer every question, accept whatever consequences come. I'm 85 years old. I have nothing left to protect except my husband's legacy, and that legacy isn't the money or the buildings. It's the idea that people can change, that redemption is possible. That's what I want to preserve. She stood slowly. Write your story, Miss Yoon. Write it honestly. I'll give you full access to our records, our history, everything. No lawyers, no restrictions. Just the truth, all of it, and then let the world decide. The story published 6 weeks later. It was massive, a 12-part series that traced the history of the Kang family from Minho's early days as a street thug in Busan to Jae-won's death as one of South Korea's most prominent philanthropists. It documented everything: the murders, the extortion, the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, all the terrible things that had been done under the Kang name. But it also documented the transformation, the gradual shift away from illegal operations, the investments in hospitals and schools and community programs, the thousands of lives touched by the foundation's work, the testimonies of doctors and teachers and students who had benefited from Kang money without ever knowing its origins. And at the center of it all, it documented Suman, the housekeeper who had married a monster and helped him become a man. The woman who had survived kidnapping and threats and 60 years of loving someone whose past could never be fully escaped. The widow who had faced a journalist's questions with nothing but honesty and asked only that the full truth be told. The public reaction was divided, as Suman had expected. Some people were outraged. They called for investigations, prosecutions, the dismantling of the foundation, and the seizure of its assets. They said that no amount of good works could erase the blood that had built the Kang Empire, that allowing the foundation to continue was an insult to every victim of organized crime. Others were more sympathetic. They argued that destroying the foundation would only create more victims, that the children in the hospitals and students in the schools had done nothing wrong and shouldn't suffer for the sins of the past. They pointed to the 60 years of transformation, the legitimate businesses, the genuine good that had been done. They said that redemption had to mean something, or what was the point of trying to change? The debate raged for months. Politicians weighed in. Pundits argued. Social media exploded with opinions and counter-opinions. The Kang Foundation became a symbol of something larger, the question of whether people and institutions could ever truly escape their past. In the end, a compromise was reached. The foundation agreed to pay restitution to verified victims of Kang family crimes. A panel was established to review claims and distribute funds. The total amount was substantial, drawn from the foundation's reserves, but not enough to threaten its ongoing operations. The foundation also agreed to transparency measures, annual audits, public disclosure of funding sources, oversight by an independent board. The days of shadow money and hidden accounts were officially over. In exchange, the investigations were closed. No charges were filed. The foundation was allowed to continue its work, subject to the new oversight requirements. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was an ending that allowed the work to continue, that acknowledged the past without being destroyed by it. When the final settlement was announced, Suman sat in the penthouse and wept, not with grief this time, but with relief. "We did it, my love," she whispered to the empty room. "We survived." The final years of Suman's life were quiet ones. She stepped back from active management of the foundation, passing leadership to a younger generation. Han's daughter Yuna, the angry one who reminded everyone of young Jaewon, had surprised everyone by channeling her rage into environmental advocacy. She became a fierce defender of the planet, using her family's resources and connections to fight climate change and corporate pollution. Han's son Min took over the foundation itself, bringing a calm competence that reminded everyone of his grandmother. Under his leadership, the charitable work expanded even further, reaching communities across Asia and eventually around the world, and Suman watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. She visited the hospital often, walking through the corridors where she had once fought off attackers, watching doctors and nurses care for sick children. The place had grown beyond anything she could have imagined, a world-class facility that drew patients from across the continent. She visited the schools, attending graduations and scholarship ceremonies, meeting students who would go on to become doctors and lawyers and teachers themselves. Each one of them carried a piece of the legacy forward, spreading ripples of change that would continue long after she was gone. She spent time with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their ancestors, not the sanitized versions, the carefully edited tales of success and triumph, but the real stories, the darkness and the light, the mistakes and the redemption. She wanted them to understand that their family was complicated, that good and evil weren't always simple, that the same blood could produce monsters and heroes depending on the choices made. "Your great-grandfather was a bad man once," she told Min's daughter, a bright-eyed girl named Su Yeon, named after her. "He did terrible things, hurt people, made choices that can never be undone." The girl looked up at her with serious eyes. "Then why do people say he was a hero?" "Because he changed. He looked at what he was and decided to become something different. It took years and years. It was hard every single day, but he kept trying, kept choosing to be better, kept building something good from the wreckage of his past." She touched the girl's cheek. "That's the most important lesson I can teach you, my dear. It doesn't matter where you start. It matters where you choose to go. Every day is a chance to be better than the day before." Suman died in her sleep at the age of 93. It was a quiet death, peaceful, the kind she had always hoped for. She simply slipped away in the night, between one breath and the next, just as Jaewon had 8 years before. The funeral was smaller than her husband's, but no less meaningful. The people who had known her gathered to share their memories, to laugh and cry and celebrate a life that had touched so many. Han, now in her 60s, spoke about the aunt who had raised her when she had no one else, about the woman who had worked herself to exhaustion to buy medicine, who had protected her from dangers she didn't even understand, who had loved her unconditionally from the moment they met. Min spoke about the grandmother who had taught him what leadership really meant, not power or control, but service, not fear, but respect, not isolation, but connection. Yuna spoke about the woman who had believed in her even when she was angry at the world, who had seen the potential beneath the rage, who had encouraged her to channel her fire into something meaningful. And the children of the foundation spoke, doctors who had trained at the hospital, teachers who had graduated from the schools, families who had found housing and support when they had nowhere else to turn. One by one, they shared their stories, their gratitude, their memories of a woman who had changed their lives without ever seeking recognition or praise. "She used to say that she was just a housekeeper," one of the doctors said, "that she hadn't done anything special, that she had just loved someone and tried to help where she could." He shook his head. "But that's what made her special. She didn't see herself as extraordinary. She just did what needed to be done, every day. For 93 years, she loved without reservation and helped without expectation. And in doing so, she changed the world." They buried her next to Jaewon in a simple grave overlooking the city they had both loved. The headstone was plain, bearing only their names and dates, and a single phrase that Suman had requested years before: "Love is stronger than fear." It was raining when they lowered her into the ground, the kind of soft, gentle rain that feels more like blessing than sorrow. Han held her children's hands as the minister spoke the final words. Min and Yuna stood together, no longer children, but still finding comfort in each other's presence. And as the rain fell and the earth was laid over the coffin, something remarkable happened. A single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the gravesite in golden light. It lasted only a moment, a brief parting of the storm, but everyone who was there remembered it for the rest of their lives. "She's with him now," Han whispered. Finally, the years continued to pass, as they always do. The Kang Foundation grew and evolved, adapting to new challenges and to new opportunities. It became a model for how organizations could acknowledge difficult pasts while building meaningful futures. Scholars studied it, journalists wrote about it, other foundations sought to emulate its approach. Min led it faithfully until his own retirement, passing leadership to the next generation with the same care his grandmother had taught him. Yuna's environmental work merged with the foundation's charitable mission, creating programs that addressed both human welfare and planetary health. And in hospitals and schools and community centers around the world, children grew up knowing nothing of the darkness that had once surrounded the Kang name. To them, it was simply a symbol of hope and possibility, a foundation that helped people who needed help. The story of Kang Jae-won and Park Soo-man became something of a legend, a tale told to children about redemption and love, about monsters who became men and housekeepers who became heroes. The details were sometimes wrong, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes softened for young ears, but the core remained true. Two broken people had found each other in the darkness. They had chosen to build something better, and against all odds, against all expectations, against everything the world had taught them about power and survival and the impossibility of change, they had succeeded. Not perfectly, not without struggle and suffering and moments of despair, but they had succeeded nonetheless. Many years later, a young woman visited the grave. She was in her 20s, with dark hair and determined eyes, and she bore the Kang name through 4 generations of descendants. She had grown up hearing the stories, had studied the Foundation's history, had walked the halls of hospitals her ancestors had built, and now she stood before the simple headstone, reading the words carved into stone. "Love is stronger than fear. I hope you were right," she whispered. "I hope it's true." She had come seeking guidance. The world was changing, facing new challenges that her great-great-grandparents could never have imagined. Climate crisis, technological disruption, social upheaval. The old ways weren't working anymore. Something new was needed. She had ideas, bold ones that would transform the Foundation once again. But she was afraid of failure, of criticism, of the weight of the legacy she carried. She knelt beside the grave, her hand resting on the cool stone. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Tell me how to be brave." The wind stirred, rustling the leaves of the trees that surrounded the cemetery. For a moment, just a moment, she could almost hear a voice. "You already know what to do. You just have to choose to do it." She smiled. It was probably just her imagination, the stories she had grown up with, shaping her perception. But it didn't matter. The message was clear. She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and looked out at the city spread below. Millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of opportunities to make a difference. "Thank you," she said to the grave. "I understand now." She walked away, her steps firm with purpose, ready to write the next chapter of a story that had begun nearly a century before. In a penthouse overlooking Seoul, when a woman with trembling hands had met a man with cold eyes, and somehow, improbably, they had saved each other. The legacy continued. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another upload. Thank you so much for watching the complete saga of Jae-won and Soo-man. Your support has meant everything throughout this incredible journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love, and remember, love is stronger than fear.